This is Dr. Robert Watkins, orthopedic spine surgeon to professional athletes and creator of the Back Doctor app.
Okay, hello, good evening everybody. How you guys doing? We're here in Marina del Rey, and I'm really happy. I can't be more excited that Dr. Larry Dorr is here to visit us. Thanks for coming.
No, thanks for having me.
It means a lot to travel across town. It's like another country these days to get across Los Angeles.
Worse than Iowa.
Yeah, you're right. Dr. Dorr, I know we have a lot of doctors and physical therapists and chiropractors, all sorts of people who we're connected with on Facebook, and so most people know Dr. Dorr if you've been alive and in Los Angeles for the past 20 to 40 years. But basically, he was one of my early mentors. He's a professor in orthopedics at U.S.C. who specializes in total joints, hips, and knees. Him and my father actually did residency together. He was 1 year ahead of my dad in residency at U.S.C. County Hospital in the early 70s. And he was on U.S.C. for a long time, was at Curl and Job with my dad there at the same time, and then at Good Sam and back to U.S.C. and is currently at U.S.C. now. And I'm really excited to have him. I don't know if I ever told you this. My first surgery I ever saw as a medical student was one of your surgeries. And of course, I knew nothing about medicine before I started medical school. Like most people just assume that I knew all this stuff from my dad. We never talked about medicine. I didn't know anything. So my first surgery as a medical student was in your room. And of course, I'm kind of standing there, just trying to not get in the way and not mess anything up and just, be a fly on the wall. And the surgery was just unbelievable. There was mallets and saws and hammering and blood and all this was like just a team of zip, 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 all this just, I remember thinking, God, this is just like brutally expert of just this precision going on and knocking out about 30 minutes. Well, the best part is then you were walking out of the room, I'm kind of standing there and you walked past me and I said, well, that seemed to go pretty well. And your response was, they all do. And you kept walking, walked right into the next room and did another one and did about 15 in that day. But it was one of those moments where, as a student, you're either going to like that or not. It's kind of like, you're either going to get into it and want to be a part of that or, but it was great. It was a great introduction.
That's a fun story.
Yeah, yeah, they all do. That's true. You knock about 15, they all look about the same. Boom. So I think one of the things that I'm interested that I actually don't know that I'd like for you to tell us a bit about is just where'd you grow up? What'd your parents do? What inspired you to become a doctor?
Yeah. Well, Rob, I'm an Iowa boy, and I still am. I bet my buddy Taboni, our friend Taboni, I bet him every year that Iowa is going to win more games than SC. And I've been winning the last 2 or 3 years,
Unfortunately,
so, as long as they keep helping, I might keep winning, So I grew up in Iowa, and my dad was a Methodist minister. And he was actually the only one of his family that left the farm. And the reason he left the farm was that when he was a teenager, he got spine infection from TB from the cow's milk. And my grandpa was a successful farmer, fortunately. He took that herd of cows. They kind of knew which one it was, but he took the whole damn herd of cows, marched them down the gravel road into Cleghorn, Iowa, and loaded them all up to get rid of them because he didn't want any more of that. And that was of course very lucky for my dad that my grandpa had money because he took him up to the Mayo Clinic. And there was a surgeon by the name of Byerdine, who's a kind of famous spine surgeon in Mayo Clinic. He did the 5th Hibs fusion he'd ever done on my dad. So my dad always went back to Mayo Clinic every year for follow-up. So I always told any patients that didn't want to come in for my studies that I'd sick my dad on him, He was very religious about that. But because he had TB of the spine, my grandpa sat at the bedside with him because he was in the Mayo Clinic for 6 weeks, did surgery, put him in a body cast, and left him in bed there for 6 weeks. My grandpa sat at the bedside with him and said, if you live through this, you're going to dedicate your life to God. And so he became a minister. And there's a little more fun story with it. Well, my grandpa knew that if he took his car up there to bring him home in March, there were so many ruts in the road in those days. They weren't paved, most of them. And the tires were more like bicycle tires, So he rented a car of a train and put him on a cot inside a car of a train and took him back home that way. So
yeah,
that's what they had to do in those days. And so it was fortunate that he had money. So my dad had to spend the whole summer in a cast and on the farm. And so they took him out to the yard every day, and he had a ball that he'd throw up against the step, and that was his activity. And the ball, one of my cousins, his cousins, had to get the ball and bring it back to him.
Right.
But my grandpa bought him a radio. So my dad listened to this station in Omaha. And this was one of the first kind of like talk shows, this lady had. And so she said that if anybody wanted a pen pal, they should write in. Well, my dad wrote in and said, I want a pen pal. And my mother was in bed in Nebraska with TB of the hip from Pow's Milk. So she wrote in, and they connected that way. My mother got 100 letters. My grandma said, you can only keep 10. Well, one of them was my dad. And she and my dad wrote for 8 years before they ever met.
Huh, no kidding.
And they're only 250 miles apart. So just think of the difference in the culture, from today and then, I mean, what guy would not go 250 miles to go see his girlfriend,
Right.
So that's what happened with my mom and dad, and then that's why my dad was in the city. And when he was a minister, when I was a young tyke, I went to Des Moines with my dad and mom because my dad, and that was a big adventure, I mean, living in a small Iowa town, get in the car and drive to Des Moines, I mean, we stopped at Dairy Queen on the way. And that was a big adventure, and so that was one of my first experiences in a doctor's office. I still can remember it because it was so impressive to me. I'm sitting there and this guy comes in and examines me and everything. And we were there because my dad wanted to be a missionary to the Philippines, but they turned him down because he'd had the TB of the spine.
Right.
So that actually kind of leads into how I did Operation Walk too, because I knew that was kind of what that would honor my dad. So we were a minister's family, and we were in Dayton, Iowa, and there was a medical missionary that came through the church trying to raise money. Gave a talk, and then he came over to the parsonage afterwards, and so we're sitting there, and I still remember this clear as bell too. His name was Bishop Rocky, and I've been told by some of my orthopedic colleagues at a meeting where I've spoken that his son went into orthopedics and is actually in practice somewhere here in the United States. But Bishop Rocky, I sat on the second step of the stairs upstairs, and he sat on the bottom one. And he told me all these stories about the people being sick in India and how he had to take care of them. And I told him, I ran upstairs and I got my piggy bank and I brought it down. It was just full of pennies. I mean, I'm a minister's kid. I got no money.
Yeah.
I break the damn thing and I hand him all the pennies and I tell him that he's going to take those back to India and save people. And I'm going to be a doctor. I was 5 years old.
You were 5? Nice.
And it never wavered.
Yeah.
I knew all the rest of my life that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's a story.
Yeah. Started at 5, you made it come to fruition.
Now the podcast's probably over.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a wrap. Done. Summed it up. What about moving into total joints? Was there something unique about doing joints and joint replacements?
Well, so that's another story. Your dad and I had a chief orthopedics named Harvey, and he's a legend of his own, and we could tell you stories about that all night, too.
Yeah.
But I was a junior resident, and I decided, I kind of wanted to stay in academics. So people weren't taking fellowships in those days. It was something that was kind of brand new. In fact, out of my class, county, I was the only one that did. Yeah. I don't know, Bob might have been the only one out of his class, too. I mean, there weren't very many.
Yeah.
But I called up Steve Lombardo at Curl and Joe Clinic because he was in practice there now, and he was a resident about 2 or 3 years ahead of me. And I said, Steve, I want to be a fellow, so can I apply for fellowship? And he said, well, you're 2 weeks too late. We picked our fellows 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I walked into Harvey's office, and I sat down. I said, Dr. Harvey, I said, I think I want to do a fellowship because I kind of want to stay in academics. And he picked up the phone right there, and he called Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, and he talked to Philip Wilson. And he said, Junior, I got a resident here, and he's pretty good, he says, and he wants to do a fellowship, and what you got? And between their phone conversation, it ends up, that was a Friday, it ends up a Monday, I'm on a plane to New York.
Yeah.
Or I'm on a plane Sunday, and I spent all day Monday doing interviews. And by Monday night, I had that fellowship in special surgery.
Yeah.
So, today everybody takes a fellowship, but boy, that was a big deal in those days. And the fellowship that I got was what they felt was their, kind of the best one in special surgery then, because total joints were kind of new, and it was an exciting field with a lot of research going on.
Yeah.
So I got what was called the CAP Fellowship in those days, Comprehensive Arthritis Program.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rheumatoid arthritis, but we did shoulders, hips, and knees, and I operated with really good surgeons there. We didn't really have real good surgeons in our residency, and
yeah.
I got my eyes opened there because I saw these guys doing surgery, and I came away saying, you can actually make people better with surgery.
I remember one of your phrases when I was in training under you was, you residents, you just teach each other. One guy doesn't know how to do it. He teaches the next guy how to do it wrong, and you just learn how to do things wrong from each other.
That's what we did. That was the county. County was that's another story. That's another night, I guess. But I'm serious. I saw that, Ranawat was my main mentor, and he and Alan Inglis were my two teachers. But I kind of gravitated to Ranawat, and he was such a superb surgeon, it was like painting a picture, and that's where I got the idea that being a surgeon was being an artist.
Yeah.
It's an artistic endeavor. You kind of painting a picture, and his wounds would just kind of fall together at the end of the operation, and I literally did say to myself, well, this is what I want to do. I can help people, Going through the county, you weren't quite sure you were doing anything good for anybody.
You were more just trying to stay alive and manage everything.
Oh, yeah. It was a great bonding experience, but no, you're right.
What do you think as far as traits as a surgeon? It's such a complex job where you've got to be composed, you've got to actually physically be able to operate on somebody and do an artistic or at least a skill-based thing. You've got to have drive, you've got to have hard work, you do research. It's multifaceted, but what do you think are some of your traits that have made you a great surgeon?
Well, I try to teach the younger people, and I think of myself as a surgical athlete. Mm-hmm. That's what I think of myself as. And I always thought it was important to stay in shape because surgery is taxing. It's stressful. But it's a good stress if you're good at it.
Right.
It's just like being good in athletics, I got a lot of my self-confidence and self-esteem through college by playing college football, and I learned a lot of lessons from that. And teamwork was a big one. Mm-hmm. And the necessity it takes to be successful at preparation. You got to prepare for the game, and then you got to go out and execute the game plan. And if you're executing it but still getting beat at halftime, you better change your game plan and do something different, to get this thing done correctly. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with surgery. You got to preoperatively have a plan when you go in there, and you got to be executing that plan. And if something isn't going right, you got to be able to adapt and change your game plan and make it work.
Yeah.
And so it has all the combinations of being an athlete. It has those facets of preparation and execution, but it has the mental aspect too. You either play the game to win or you play the game to lose. Mm-hmm. And what happens with a lot of surgeons as they get older, and it's a real sad thing to me now that nearly half of the orthopedic surgeons are burned out to the point that they kind of wish they weren't in medicine. I think that's so sad.
Yeah.
Because I just had a fabulous career. I loved every minute of it. And I know your dad did too. We've been buddies through this, the whole thing. So
yeah,
I don't know how that happens to people, but I think one of the reasons it happens is because they don't really understand themselves. You have to know your strengths and your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got weaknesses, you probably can't make them up. You've got to get people around you that make it up for you. You know,
right. Right.
I've got a very creative personality. That's what I've got. I'm a terrible manager. You know, I don't like organization. I don't like details. At college, my roommate kidded me all the time because I never put a sheet on my bed because, man, I had to go wash it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's just the way my personality is. And so it made me a good surgeon. It made me good at research. It gave me a lot of drive. But my wife is fortunately a good manager. I had a manager named Jerry Ward who ran my medical practice for all my years. And, you know, they saved my rear end, basically, because... but I knew my strengths and my weaknesses. I knew what I was good at, and I knew I better not try, you know.
Yeah.
I'd be a terrible head of a department, for instance,
right.
because
right.
those guys, you know.
Right.
But that's why some of them are terrible surgeons, too, you know, because they got the manager personality. They don't have the...
Right.
So you need to know your strengths and weaknesses. And then as long as you know those and you play to your strengths and you cover your weaknesses and you understand that you're not going to win the game every time. I mean, I don't know. There's only been one pro football team that ever was undefeated. You know, I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Right.
So you're going to have complications and you're going to have failures. And if you can't accept those, if you have such a great fear of failure, and you're so devastated by every complication, then you better get out of surgery.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is you're going to start to play to lose, not to lose. And you're not playing to win.
Right.
And when you play not to lose, you lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time and again.
Yeah, no question. Dealing with complications is the hard, emotionally and everything else, energetically, the hardest part of our job. You got to figure out how you're going to deal with it and sleep at night and get up and go to work the next day and have enthusiasm and want to go back and do it again, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, your dad and I have talked about complications, and we both had complications that tore our heart out, you know. I mean, and you go nights without sleep. You go months without happiness about that case.
Right.
And you know, you can have in my peak, I was doing 700 joints a year, so I could have 690 of them that went all right, but the ones I thought about were the 10 that didn't. You know, so you got to be able to do that. Take it though. You got to be able to take it. You know, I mean, if you can't take it, the other 690 aren't going to do any good either. You know.
Yeah.
Because you also have to impart that confidence to the patient.
Yeah.
They have to know you know what you're doing and that you're good at it. And if you can't impart that confidence, they don't get well as easily. They get well better when they believe that you're going to do it, you know?
Yeah. It's a big part of it that, you know, when I grew up in medicine, it was give the patients all the options. They get to make the informed consent. You know, you're just kind of, you're not, and that's your job as the doctor. And my dad helped me understand you also have to give people hope. Like your job is also to inspire people. And I learned that from you too. I remember walking to some patient rooms. We'd round on 50 people in one morning, started at 5 in the morning, and some patients would kind of be laying there and moaning and, I'm so sore. Maybe something went wrong and I'm not feeling right and all this other kind of stuff. And as a resident, we'd kind of not know how to handle them, try and give more pain medication, not know what to do. And you'd walk in the room and go, now look, you're doing fine. If there's a problem, I'd be worried. I'm not worried, so you don't need to worry. Now get up and walk. And walk out of the room, and like 95% of the time, patients would go, okay, let's do it.
I had another good line that I use, which patients would catch on to, and it would turn a lot of people around. I used to walk in, if I had somebody like that, I'd walk in and say, listen to me. 90% of recoveries from here up.
Yeah.
If you don't get your head together, you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
So now you got one or two choices. You're either going to let your body control your brain, or your brain's going to control your body.
Yeah.
Now, if you want this to go easy, your brain better control your body.
Yeah.
And it for a lot of people, the light went on. You know.
Yeah.
I mean,
cool. That's a good one.
The game is any game I've ever played, sports, medicine, and marriage, and any that. Hell, 50% of it's mental. You know, I mean, you you gotta be tough mentally in life. That's just the way it is.
Let me ask you one other question. As a team leader, you mentioned the teamwork in the OR and stuff, and not being a good manager at the same time, your OR ran as efficient and clockwork as possible, and you were hard, in the OR, as far as just you had a certain level of expectation and drove it a certain way. And anybody walked in your room was scared to not mess up because they knew there was high expectations. And at the same time, you had the same people all the time. You had so much loyalty of people who worked with you that, that always had a big impression on me. People went with you wherever you went because they liked working for you. They liked being part of the team. And I'll tell you one other thing about, there was another doctor who was a great guy, really nice guy, did a similar thing to you. Everybody loved him. But I noticed in the OR, his surgeries took twice as long because every time he asked for an instrument, people were kind of, lackadaisical handing it to him because they weren't on edge a little bit. They didn't have that little bit, and that balance between. And medicine has changed so much. It's not as much the military style as it used to be. It's but at the same time, getting a team to work at optimal performance and have a little bit of edge and fear and energy to work, but at the same time not to be inhibited by it to where it's a positive thing that you're all on the same page. Can you talk to all that? Because it was remarkable. I mean, you set that up better than anybody I ever saw in an operating room.
Well, I mentioned earlier that one thing I learned from sports was teamwork. I always played team sports. I kind of wish now I'd played golf when I was younger because I'm trying to play it now, and I need a team.
Yeah, right. Someone to help you out.
But I learned that. And another place where it was ground into me was at Rancho. When I started on the total joint service at Rancho, they ran that in team fashion at the conference. The OTs, the PTs, the rheumatologists, the orthopedic surgeons, everybody was equal in terms of having their opinion on the patient. Mm-hmm. And I got people around me that were passionate about being good and good patient care, like Jerry Ward. And then Mary Ellen Sieben ran my OR the whole time.
And Jacqueline Perry, who was...
I did a lot of work with Jackie, and she, I never operated with her, but she was a tiger in the operating room. Mm-hmm. But she was just smart, and I learned a lot from her. Mm-hmm. But I didn't learn anything about surgery from her.
Yeah.
But, I've probably done 15,000 total joints, and 15,000 times when I've walked in the OR, it's like me walking onto the field to do a game. I got hyped up for every operation because I knew that patient they were trusting me so much that they'd go to sleep, give up total control, and let me cut on them. Now, if somebody's going to let me do that, I better do a good job. Mm-hmm. That's the way I always felt. And of course, that also is one reason it devastates the heck out of you when you lose. But I and everybody around me knew that that's the way I was, and that I expected everybody to be like that if they're going to be in my team. If they don't want to be that way, then go find another OR. Mm-hmm. And including the anesthesiologists, mean, that's the way everybody needed to be. But the reason they're loyal, Rob, is because you can be as tough as you have to be in the operating room if they know you love them.
Yeah.
And I loved every one of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could tell that. Yeah.
So that's why we were, and you're right, everybody who ever came in our OR said, this is a machine.
Yeah, right.
And that definitely helped your results.
Yeah.
People aren't making mistakes.
Yeah.
And Rudy was my scrub tech for 20 years, I think. And then another guy named Bud before that. Actually, Neil Elatrosh's wife was my scrub tech for a while at Curlin Jones. She was really good.
Yeah.
But we'd show off sometimes if people came to visit us. I'd say to Rudy, okay, now this guy thinks he's hot shit. So we aren't going to say a word during this operation.
Yeah.
And so Rudy knows the operation so well that I'd do the whole operation. I'd never ask for anything, and I'd never say anything, and I'd just do the operation.
Yeah.
And we get out, and the guy would say, that was really something.
Yeah, right. There's nothing better than a surgeon. You put your hand out, somebody has the instrument you want next. It makes you so reassured that you feel like everybody's on the same page here.
Yeah.
It's just such a fundamental thing. I'll ask you one other thing before we transition to a couple topics. Is there anything else now that you just stopped operating, a month or two ago,
Yeah.
and I know you've got a million other things you're working on. Is there any other reflections you have about being a doctor and being in the operating room today?
Well, my main reflection is that it's definitely, I just can't imagine a profession that's more rewarding as long as you do the things we've talked about. You know yourself, you know your strengths, you approach things correctly, you have a good team around you.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great reward. I mean, what other profession has people coming in and telling you saved their life every single day?
Yeah.
I mean, you make so much impact on people, and then it's a multiplier effect. You operate on this patient, and you make them better, and now you've changed the life of their spouse.
Yeah.
And their kids.
Yeah.
And their friends. Mm-hmm. And their church maybe, or their bridge group. And we go on these operation walk trips. We can change a whole village. Yeah. I mean, and so your impact is just it's the multiplier effect is just sometimes it's not appreciated.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of doctors don't appreciate it, and maybe that's another reason they burn out. I mean, they don't really realize how much impact they have on society.
Yeah. And just for people who don't know, the Operation Walk that you set up, the origin of it, doing surgeries, going to foreign countries and third world countries and people who need medical care that we have in America, total joints and total knees that you have done over there. How long has it been in existence? How many joints have been done? What are some of the numbers about it?
Yeah, I think the last number I heard was around 17,000.
Yeah.
And I started it. I went to Russia on a trip to Russia, and the head of Russian orthopedics invited me to come over and teach him. Mm-hmm. And we were in the big orthopedic hospital in Moscow, and this guy was married to Valentina Tereskova, which was fun because she's the only woman who's ever circled the Earth by herself in a spaceship.
Yeah.
And so she served us dinner one night, and she took me through Star City, and she was a rock star. Everybody in Star City wanted her autograph. It was so that was a fun part of the trip. But I realized on this trip that here's Russia. That when I was a kid growing up in those small Iowa towns, we'd have bomb drills where you'd be in class and they'd ring a bell and everybody had to get under their desk and hide. What I mean?
Yeah.
Because we were practicing in case the Russians came over to attack us.
Yeah.
So I grew up scared to death of this country. I got over there, and I walked into their main orthopedic hospital for the whole country, and the weeds were knee high.
Yeah.
And when I scrubbed for surgery, they gave me a bar of soap and a regular sink, and then I stuck my hands into a bowl of acetic acid, and they had a little hourglass that they flipped.
Yeah.
And I left it in the acetic acid until the sand had run through.
Until you lost one layer of skin?
Then you walk in the OR, and the scrub nurse is putting your gloves on, and she touches your skin. She doesn't care. I look over, and they're prepping the leg, and the guy's doing it with his bare hands.
Yeah.
So my fear of Russia went away real quick.
Right.
I realized that country was backwards, number one. Number two, they were so poor that they went to war. I don't think it lasts more than a week because they'd run out of food.
Right.
Or money.
Right.
But the other thing I learned was that if Russia needs this help, what about these other countries?
Yeah.
And so we were on the midnight train from Russia to St. Petersburg, or Moscow to St. Petersburg. And Valentina Tereskova took us down to the midnight train. We had supper at her house. She cooked it for us, so I had dinner cooked by the only woman that's ever circled the earth. And with every single course, we had a lot of vodka, I'm telling you. Valentina liked that vodka.
Right.
What a great person she was, though. Boy, I really enjoyed her. Takes us down to the train. Well, when they see her at the train, we're immediately in the first car, in the best car, and, we're stars for the whole trip.
Yeah.
And so they brought out the some sort of cognac, Armenian cognac, that's what it was, and that was pretty good. We drank that all the way, St. Petersburg.
Right.
And this was like June, so there wasn't any nighttime, you know. I mean, it was like day in St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. But when we got there in the paper, I read that Operation Smile was in St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. And I turned to a couple of guys we were with, and I said, you know what? I got an idea. We could do this with hips and knees instead of cleft palates.
Yeah.
And we're making them walk, so we call it Operation Walk.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. And I knew that I also knew that was honoring my dad, so I thought that was a double treat.
Yeah.
And got back here and talked to Jerry Ward and Mary Ellen, and they both thought it was a great idea. They were all in on it. They really, I mean, it wouldn't have happened without them.
Yeah. And
I was at SC at the time, so I thought I ought to ask Sample, make sure that the SC was for it, and he was very enthusiastic about it. He said, "Go for it." You know, I mean, I didn't have much support from the orthopedic department, but Sample was behind it, so we were okay there.
Yeah.
And we started, and it's there have been several, I mean double digits, orthopedic surgeons who Operation Walk has saved besides all the patients we've helped, because we were talking about the burnout rate. And when you go on Operation Walk and you take care of these patients, this is the romance of medicine that you thought you were getting into when you went to medical school.
Yeah. Because
here you're taking care of people, you're not getting paid, so there's no money stresses, and it's unconditional giving.
Yeah.
And you've got patients that are so appreciative that you just get this warm glow back from them and their whole family, you know. I mean, because you got to think about it. We're going into these poor countries that don't have the money for their medical care to do total joints. That's an elective operation, requires an expensive implant, and they don't do it.
Yeah.
And so if you're crippled in those countries, and you don't have the money to fly to the United States or some country where they've got a surgeon that'll do it, you're stuck.
Yeah.
And so for those patients, you know, when we come in and we do these operations, it's like a miracle dropped out of the sky. This plane from the U.S. comes in, drops out of the sky, and these guys walk off. And you got to imagine how brave they are in a way to do this, because here we're strangers. They've never met us. They don't have any idea how good we are, but they go to sleep and lay down and let us cut them open and do an operation. You know? I mean, so that shows you how bad their life is.
Right.
Because they're willing to do that.
Yeah.
And then we make them better.
Yeah.
And if you're young in that and have a bad joint in those countries, you can't get married. If you're a woman and you can't get a job, if you're a man, you're an outcast.
Yeah.
So we really changed their lives.
Yeah.
There's one, I'll just tell one interesting story from, we were operating in Hanoi in Vietnam, and it was a military hospital, and this doctor came up to me. He said, "You know that lady operated yesterday?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you know, she came from a village up there in the mountains," he said, "and that whole village hates the United States," he said, "because all they know is that you bombed them all war long," he said, and all they think is you wanted to kill them.
Yeah.
And he said, when this lady goes back up there and she's walking normal again, she's out of pain, and they see her walking down the street, and they ask her what happened. She says, "A doctor from the United States operated on me, and I'm good again now."
Yeah.
He said, "You're going to change that. You changed that whole village." He
Yeah.
said. He said, "So you're a better ambassador for the United States than all the politicians and congressmen and people they send over here."
Right.
He said, "You changed the whole village."
That's awesome.
So I mean that that's just the impact that it has.
Yeah.
And doctors just don't sometimes realize that that's the impact they have.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they burn out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
you can lose touch with that.
So these doctors that have gone on the trips that have come to me afterwards and said, "You know, I was so discouraged and so unhappy, but they said, you gave me new life. And that new life, when they come back, I mean, that glow lasts at least 6 months, and then they can go on another trip and get it again,
Yeah.
But it's, and we've taken students, pre-med students, medical students, residents, fellows. Every one of them comes back with a deeper love for medicine, and the pre-med students have all gone into medicine. So
Yeah.
I've been proud of that too.
That's awesome. It's a great combination of the humanity of medicine.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to ask you one other thing, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. Just your wife, Marilyn, and what an amazing person, what great energy and everything she has about her, and how much she has contributed to your contribution to the world, the two of you together.
Well, I wouldn't have had my success without Marilyn. You hear people say that all the time. The one beyond, and the guys will all say, "Oh yeah, I couldn't do it without my wife." But
yeah,
I mean, I couldn't have done it without my wife because I've already described my personality. I mean, I'm kind of a free radical, and she's organized, and she raised the kids because I was off trying to build a career and get famous, and she moved. She talks about how we moved 14 times when I was in training, and I was a little hard on the kids, changing schools and things, and but she, every time she packed them up, and we have one daughter who's retarded, has cerebral palsy and is retarded, and had seizures. That girl, when she first started seizing, she'd have as many as 25 grand mal seizures a day, and Marilyn took care of her.
Wow.
And she's raising the other two boys besides. And she's taking care of me, And so, the first 10 years were tough. We, probably are in most marriages, you're both young and you got your own goals and things. But once we got through that, boy, she became the best partner a guy could want. Now we've had 53 years.
Yeah, nice. And I just thought about when you talk about having the complications and coming home and it weighing on you, she seems like the perfect person to be able to listen to you, be with you, and then have the positivity to help you get up the next day and go back to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, she supported me. She always encouraged me. She knew what I told her one time back in Iowa City when we were dating. Of course, this has changed, but I told her at the time, I said, if you're going to marry me, you got to know one thing. Medicine comes first and you come second. Well, that was kind of the way it was when it started, but it's long ago changed, I mean, she's first and medicine second. But she knew I was driven. Yeah. And she wasn't gonna dilute my drive. Yeah. And so you're right. Yeah. I use the analogy a little bit. I'll tell a fun story about another wife that's a little bit of an analogy, like you're saying about with the complications. Walt Lillihei is the first person doctor, and he was in Minnesota, and he's the first one that really did open heart surgery successfully. And he was a really good surgeon. I mean, he could get into the heart and close a VSD, a ventricular septal defect, in 15 minutes and have the heart close and get out of there. But they had, I mean, he was just starting out. He didn't have any heart-lung machines or anything like that. Right. And they were, the only way that they could do the operations initially is they had to put the patients into an ice bath and get the temperature down so low. Right. And that's why he had to be quick to do it. Right. And the guy that tried to do it before him in that hospital had his first two patients die, and when the second one died on the table, he just dropped his hands, his gloves, and his gown and everything were on. He just, like this, just like he was mesmerized, walked out of the OR and never walked back into an OR again. I mean, right. So we're talking about guys that can't take failure. Right. So Lillihei had a lab, and they were working with dogs, and he had a couple other young surgeons working with him. And one of them came, because his wife was pregnant, and he thought of the placenta, came up with the idea that they could take the mother or the father of the child they're operating on and hook the two together, and you'd have a living heart-lung machine. So they started doing that.
Right.
So they hooked the femoral arteries and veins of the two people up, and they drove blood from the mother into the baby's body.
No kidding.
They had nothing going through the heart. They had the
right.
vessels.
Was that after a night of drinking brandy? They came up with the idea too, and decided.
Yeah. So I was
it's a miracle.
I'm not done.
Yeah.
So he and these guys, they used to. He loved Dixieland music, and there was a bar right across the street from the hospital that played Dixieland. So they'd go over there. They'd work in the lab till midnight.
Yeah.
And they'd go over to the bar and they'd drink, and then old Walt would slip into the bathroom with one of the waitresses and come back out, after a while. And so, but he couldn't keep these kids alive because they were all dying from arrhythmia. And he didn't have a pacemaker. He's the one that. I'll tell that story real quick too. But so, one summer he lost 6 kids.
Yeah.
And of course, they had internal medicine. They wanted this guy to stop.
Right.
Well, the head of surgery was Wangenstein, his famous general surgeon, and Wangenstein protected Lillihei. So someone asked Lillihei's wife, how Walt put up with those deaths.
Yeah.
And she said, well, Walt, she said, he comes home, he doesn't say anything to me, he drinks 2 martinis, he goes to bed, and at 6 o'clock he's back at the hospital.
Yeah, right.
And, seriously, I'm just saying that's the attitude you got to have. You know? I mean, you're going to have failures. Well, of course, you're doing something new. I mean, I did a lot of new things, and I thank God for the patients who let me operate on when I was designing implants. And when I designed non-cemented hips in the early 80s, there was no book on it. There was not even any more than any guidelines on it. But anyway, so Lillihei finally figured it out. And then another fun story is he knew he had to figure out some way to stimulate the heart and get the rhythm back. Yeah. He needed a pacemaker. Right. So he goes to the head of surgery nurses. He says, "Can I get one of the engineers up here? I gotta figure out how I can make a pacemaker." Yeah. And she says they won't come into the OR because they're union. But she says, "I got a neighbor down the street who likes to do this stuff, and I'll get him to help you." Yeah. So she got him to come help. And the guy went home, and he found an old trade magazine on ultraconductors, and designed the first pacemaker. Took up a whole gurney. Yeah. But it worked. Yeah. And his name was Earl. I can't think of Earl's last name now. But because of that, once he got it figured out, he started a company, and that company was Medtronic.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, nice.
And so Lillihei, of course, had sold a lot of the early stock in that. So financially, he was fine. But
good, finally, a doctor success story.
Yeah, and then of course I'll just finish his story because it's kind of fun. So he wanted to be chairman of the department when Wangenstein retired, and they didn't give it to him. They hired this guy from out here in California. Yeah. And so this guy kind of told Lillihei, he kind of wasn't welcome anymore. Yeah. And so Lillihei got a job as head at New York Hospital in New York, Cornell University. And so he told this guy he's taking all his lab equipment, he's going to New York. And the guy said, "You can't have your lab equipment, that belongs to the university." Yeah. So Walt says, "Okay." And the night before he leaves town, he and a couple of his buddies hire a truck, back it up to the lab, empty the lab out. He left a rose in the middle of the floor and drove to New York.
Yeah. Nice.
So he got his lab stuff. And then what happened in New York,
Right.
so then what happened
he had
is
written down it was typhus.
he goes to
Las
Las
Vegas on the convention.
Well, somebody figured out that what he'd done, it wasn't
Yeah.
a typhus or anything.
Right.
So he kind of gets fired at New York, too.
Uh-huh.
And so he walks out of there on the last day of December of his, must have been 1969 or something like that.
Yeah.
And never operated again, even though he's one of the best surgeons that ever operated on a heart. But, and he was kind of discredited for a long time. But then in the 80s, the Cardiac Surgeon Society realized his contribution to all of their lives.
Yeah.
Because he opened up all the surgery.
Yeah.
And they had a big event for him, and so
Cool.
in the long run, of course, all those years he had plenty of money from the Medtronic stuff, but
Yeah, he was all right.
But he finally got his due too.
Yeah. That's a funny drive. I mean, the people who have been driven in this world to make change and stuff happen. Sometimes you have some fatal flaws to your personality that make catch up to you, and in different ways. One of the stories I got to tell you, because you reminded me of my dad when he was trying to build a spine center, and he was pushing. He's getting a lot of resistance. It wasn't coming together, so he asked my little sister Emily, who was always very smart and precocious, and she was pretty young at the time. And
She was precocious.
She was, wasn't she? I think she still is. Where are you, Emily? Come meet with us. But my dad says to Emily, I got this vision. I got this vision to set this thing up, and it's not working out. I got a lot of resistance. People aren't on board, and Emily said, well, Dad, there's been a lot of people with vision throughout time, and some people become very successful, and other people just fail. Time will tell which one you are.
Time did tell, didn't it?
Right.
And now Emily can say that her dad is very successful.
He did it. We made it to the marina. And in those regards, I guess I want to thank you on behalf of everybody you trained and taught and contributed to. Like you said, the impact you can have on people's lives, on patients, and on people you teach, and the impact you had on my life, helping to teach me how to be a doctor and to care for people and set up a tight ship, be the best you can be every day when you walk in an operating room. All those things have been highly inspiring, and every day I go to work, I hope to carry that on. So I appreciate everything you've given me, and I appreciate you coming tonight.
Yeah, well, Rob, I really appreciate that compliment. It means a lot to me. It really does. As you get to the winter of your career, you look back on what things you are proudest of. There are a lot of things I did that I'm proud of, but, there are a lot of things I did that, I cut corners and it was really funny when I first started doing research and designing implants in the early 80s. There were no rules. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit like Lily High, he'd never get away with all the deaths he had today. They'd shut him down cold, mean, your IRB would be all over you like a hawk. Yeah. And so in those days, we always were doing what we thought was the best, but we knew we were not sure whether it was going to work or not. You know?
Right.
So you really did appreciate those patients, but the same thing's a little bit true of a fellow that comes in to study with you. He's not sure whether it's going to work or not. Is he going to get along with you, and is he going to learn what he wants to learn? And
right.
And a resident too, but it's even more important with the fellow because they're spending a whole year with you.
Yeah.
So when you're done, it's almost like a father-son relationship. You bond with those people, and their career means a lot to you, and their happiness and success mean a lot to you. Mm-hmm. So that again, as I said, as you look back on what the things you're proud of, I have to say some of the things I'm the most proud of is the people, not the implants and not the operations I devised and not the techniques I dreamed up, but the people. That's the thing I'm the proudest of.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks again for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great. Thanks for everybody joining us. If you have any questions or anything, put it in the comments section, and we'll respond and reach out. And you got to come back because we still have like 50 other topics to talk about. And we'll get my dad in on the next one too. So thanks for joining us tonight, guys.
If you get your dad here, I won't get a word in edgewise.
That's true. That's true. All right. Good night.